We tend to see our own time as unique, a pinnacle of progress so advanced that the lessons of the distant past feel like fables. We have instant communication, global markets, and technologies that would seem like magic to any previous generation. We feel, deep down, that our system is too big, too complex, and too essential to ever truly fail. It's a comforting thought. But it's also a dangerous one. Because over 3,000 years ago, another world felt the exact same way. The Late Bronze Age was not a primitive time. It was a shimmering network of powerful, literate, and deeply interconnected empires, a globalized world in its own right. And then, in the space of a few decades, it burned to the ground. Palaces were abandoned, trade routes vanished, entire systems of writing were forgotten for centuries. It was a civilizational collapse so absolute it has been called the world's first dark age. The story is a ghost, a warning from a world of dust. But what if it's more than that? What if the 5 critical fractures that shattered their world are reappearing, right now, in our own? The first parallel is the brittle architecture of our interdependence. The Bronze Age world was a marvel of interconnected trade. Tin from the mountains of Afghanistan traveled thousands of miles to be alloyed with copper from Cyprus, creating the bronze that equipped armies and defined the age. Chariots made in Egypt were pulled by horses bred on the steppes. A king in Greece could drink from a cup made by a Hittite artisan. This intricate network created immense wealth and efficiency. But it also created a hidden, fatal fragility. When one key port was blockaded, or one resource ran dry, the shock didn't just affect one kingdom, it sent tremors through the entire system. A single point of failure could cascade into a system-wide shutdown. Does that sound familiar? We call it a just-in-time supply chain. We've built a global economy of breathtaking complexity, where a microchip designed in one country, fabricated in another, and assembled in a third, is essential for nearly every aspect of modern life. We saw during the pandemic how this efficiency becomes a profound vulnerability overnight. A single grounded cargo ship, a single factory shutdown, can create shortages and economic chaos half a world away. We have built a magnificent crystal palace, forgetting that crystal shatters. The second haunting echo is the unforgiving pressure of a changing climate. For years, archaeologists debated the cause of the Bronze Age collapse, pointing to wars and invaders. But beneath the surface, a more powerful story has emerged from ice cores, ancient pollen, and lakebed sediments. Evidence now points to a severe, centuries-long period of climate change, including a devastating drought that swept across the eastern Mediterranean. The great agricultural empires, particularly Egypt and the Hittites, had built their civilizations on the promise of predictable harvests. When the rains failed and the fields turned to dust, that promise was broken. The famines that followed would have destabilized governments, sent waves of desperate migrants across the land, and pitted starving kingdoms against one another. Climate change wasn't just another problem for them, it was the stressor that multiplied every other existing crisis. Today, we no longer need to analyze ancient pollen to see the climate changing. We see it in our headlines, in the unprecedented heat waves, the historic floods, and the relentless droughts that strain our own agricultural systems. We, too, have built a global civilization on the assumption of a stable climate. The quiet, background threat that our ancestors faced has become, for us, a constant, roaring crisis. Today, we no longer need to analyze ancient pollen to see the climate changing. We see it in our headlines, in the unprecedented heat waves, the historic floods, and the relentless droughts that strain our own agricultural systems. We, too, have built a global civilization on the assumption of a stable climate. The quiet, background threat that our ancestors faced has become, for us, a constant, roaring crisis. The third parallel is the rise of the disruptors. Ancient Egyptian texts speak with fear of the Sea Peoples, mysterious groups who appeared on the shores of the Mediterranean in fleets of ships, raiding wealthy coastal cities and toppling kingdoms. For a long time, we saw them as barbarian invaders. But a more nuanced picture is emerging. These Sea Peoples were likely not a single ethnic group, but a mixed multitude of people displaced by the famine and chaos of their own collapsing societies. They were non-state actors, decentralized and mobile, who exploited the weaknesses of the rigid, centralized empires. They weren't trying to conquer territory in the traditional sense, they were symptoms of a system that was already failing its people. Now, look at our world. Who are our disruptors? They are the decentralized networks that can challenge the authority of nation-states, from cyber attackers who can cripple infrastructure from a laptop, to misinformation campaigns that erode social trust. They are the forces that operate outside the established rules of the international order. Like the Sea Peoples, these modern disruptors are often not the cause of the system's instability, but a symptom of its underlying fragility and its failure to provide for everyone. The fourth parallel is the invisible trap of overcomplexity. The great empires of the Bronze Age were miracles of bureaucracy. They had armies of scribes, complex legal codes, and towering, hierarchical governments. This complexity allowed them to manage vast territories and build wonders. But it also became a cage. When sudden, unexpected crises hit, like famine or rebellion, their systems were too rigid, too specialized, and too slow to adapt. A farmer could not simply change their crop, and a scribe could not easily become a soldier. Their society was so efficient at doing one thing that it became incapable of doing anything else. Its complexity was a strength in times of stability, but a fatal weakness in times of shock. We, too, worship at the altar of complexity. Our financial, legal, and technological systems are so intricate that no single person can possibly understand them. This specialization creates incredible efficiencies, but it also creates hidden risks and removes resilience. We have become profoundly dependent on systems we cannot fully control, and our inability to react nimbly to unforeseen, black swan, events is a vulnerability we share with the kings of old. The fifth and final parallel is perhaps the most human of all, a crisis of legitimacy. Evidence suggests that in the final decades of the Bronze Age, the gap between the ruling elites and the common people grew into a chasm. While palaces hoarded grain and imported luxury goods, the countryside was likely suffering from hardship and hunger. This great divorce shatters the sacred trust between the governed and their governors. When people feel that their leaders are not only incapable of solving their problems but are indifferent to their suffering, the social contract dissolves. The revolts and civil unrest that archaeologists see in the ruins of burned cities were not just random acts of violence, they were the predictable result of a system that had lost the faith of its own people. Today, we speak of a crisis of trust in our institutions. We see rising inequality and a pervasive feeling that the system is rigged in favor of a disconnected global elite. This sentiment is a powerful, corrosive force. A civilization can survive almost any external shock if its people are united in a common purpose. But when that internal cohesion rots away, the entire structure becomes hollow and fragile, ready to collapse at the slightest push. These five parallels are not a prophecy of doom. They are a warning. The people of the Bronze Age were brilliant and resourceful, but they were sailing into a perfect storm without a map, unable to see the patterns that were leading them to ruin. We have one advantage they did not: we have their story. We can see the echoes in our own time. The final page of our chapter is not yet written. And the critical question facing us is the one they never had the chance to ask: seeing the patterns, what will we do differently?